We have to actually request that people stop being racist to Gary Lineker, the famous footballer and football pundit and insufferable woke scold on social media.
Notoriously a white man.
No, breaking news, Gary Lineker is actually black.
Huh. Is he doing a Rachel Dolezal?
No, well, no, not even a Rachel Dolezal. He's always been black, as far as he's concerned. Anyway, before we go into the rise and fall of this once great footballer, if you want to support us, you can go over to lotus.com and enjoy the rise and fall of Oasis. Apparently a once great band, according to Thomas, but I don't agree with him on that. But they talk about how Oasis is a genre-defining band, and it's a very interesting listen. Anyway, so Gary Lineker, as you may know if you're older, was a famous footballer, but if you're younger, you may only know him as a commentator who is insufferably woke on social media. I mean, that appears to be what he is.
The refugee man, who's just like, I have loads of refugees living in my loft. I'm like, no, you don't.
Well, that was actually what the criticism was. He was, in 2020, he was insufferably virtue signaling over the channel immigrants, so people breaking into our country. He was like, oh, we should take them. And so a Conservative MP was like, well, how many are you taking? And he was like, well, none, obviously. NIMBY, obviously. He's got a massive mansion. He's paid like £1.7 million a year by the BBC. He's the highest paid BBC commentator. He's like, oh, those poor refugees. It's like, well, Gary, I think you can actually afford to build them a block of houses. A block of flats. You could afford to put them up. Get a big barn, insulate it, put beds in there on your giant 1,000-acre estate.
Just build a refugee camp. And of course, with all the money you have, you can make it as humane as you want as well.
And imagine the kudos you'd get on social media if you were like, I'm funding this. I would be like, okay, great, Gary, well done. I'd be like, bravo, that's actually doing something good. Instead, you're just virtue signaling, aren't you? And so obviously, Lee Anderson, who was MP for Ashfield, was like, yeah, try taking them in your own home, which he didn't. But then he continued complaining. It was like, well, this is affecting Britain's global reputation, don't you know? A small xenophobic minority that somehow becomes so powerful and influential. Imagine that. Imagine that there was a small xenophobic minority of racists in this country who managed to influence government policy. No, Gary, this is the majority opinion that these illegal foreigners should go home. That's the majority opinion of the country, by far, in fact. But anyway, of course, in 2020...
So obviously the right opinion.
Yeah, exactly. In 2020, he was supporting Black Lives Matter, obviously, insufferably, tweeting about Black Lives Matter and trying to make a joke about it, which is even more funny because the joke got him chewed out by the leftists. It's like, Gary, what made you think you tell a joke? Do you think they were like, hello, fellow black man. We can joke about Black Lives Matter, can't we, fellow blacks? It's like, no, you can't, Gary, okay? I don't care how dark you think your skin is. Right, so anyway, in 2020, in the Premier League, a bunch of players, of course, took the knee on both sides in support of Black Lives Matter, and the slogan replaced the names of all the players on the backs of their shirts. So virtuous. Or went well. But he tweeted out, had a tenner on Black Lives Matter to score the first goal. And loads of people were like, wow, casual racism, Gary. He was like, what? I'm black. Can't joke about these things anymore, I'm afraid, Gary. And of course, when it came to taking the knee, he was like, well, if you boo the England players for taking the knee, you're part of the reason why the players are taking the knee. Okay? Martin Daubney replied to this. Excellent reply. Utter rubbish. I'm taking the knee as I'm against Black Lives Matter, saying they want to defund the police, abolish capitalism, and attack the nuclear family. Yeah, anything.
Well, yeah, that means you're part of the problem, which is that you're a heretic. I mean, you don't want our ideology, therefore we're going to keep pushing.
Well, yeah, exactly. Gary Lineker's just like, well, okay, but I'm assuming all of that's good. Again, as my fellow blacks would say, this is what we need to do. And of course he blocked him, which is hilarious.
Why do you keep saying my fellow blacks?
Well, because Gary Lineker's the victim of racism.
Are you genuine? I'm still I'm not sure joking. I believe that he's even... I mean, that would be the stupidest possible thing for him to do, surely.
Well, that's only because you know what Gary Lineker looks like.
Okay.
He is Britain's Talcum X. Let's get to the next article.
I got racist abuse for my darkish skin.
Darkish?
I mean, ish is doing a lot of work there, isn't it?
A lot of heavy lifting. I mean, like, I've seen lighter Italians.
Am I darkish now?
I think I am.
Yeah, you're more darkish than him. So.
But the thing is, right, and what you can see from this picture is that Gary Lineker used to be a footballer. And footballers play football out of doors. And when you're out of doors, running around all day in the sun, if you actually aren't black, your skin goes a slightly darker shade than if you spend all of your time indoors.
Does it really?
It does.
I had no idea.
This is what we white folk call a suntan, Gary. And it looks like you may have had one for a while during your career as a young man.
You've been on WebMD for that diagnosis.
I did, actually. I had to... Just, Gary, you're a joke, mate. No one thinks you're black or, like... I don't know what race you think you are. Like,
the chat is just full of we was footballers. It's
like, sorry, Gary, I can't take it seriously, mate. But he was, he said he was a tiny geeky kid in Leicester and would be bullied without football. He said he was racially abused a couple of times as a professional footballer. I mean, your name is Lineker. It's not like, an African name. Like, it's not Abdullah or something.
You don't have African features or skin or genetics.
Your parents aren't from Africa. They're from Leicester.
You don't even have an African object probably near you in your house. So
you look normally British, I'm afraid, Gary. I don't know what I have to say to that. But he says, without being good at sport, life would have been very different for me because I think I would have been bullied at school. Well, I mean, if you're just making it up. Here's an alternate reality where I was bullied at school because I was black. This is Gary Lineker. It's like, okay, but you weren't? I was kind of marginally that way anyway, because I was this tiny geeky kid with darkish skin. I had pretty much racist abuse, although I'm not. I'm as English as they come.
Oh.
So what, the kids at school were calling you the N-word for having a tan because you played football?
I don't think that happened.
Yeah, I don't really believe that.
But then also, surely he's dobbed himself in a real problem there with the left-wingers by saying that because he's white, he's as English as they come. I imagine that didn't go down well.
There are a few questions about that.
Right.
He's like, no, look, I'm white. You mean English? Oh. Okay. He says, when asked if this was really the case, because the people on this podcast were like, you were racially abused, were you, Gary?
Yes. They called me Jungle X. Like, no, they didn't. No.
And he was like, oh, it happened all the time. Even in professional football, I had that a couple of times. Well, all of your professional football matches were broadcasted, Gary. Why isn't there any footage of them calling you racist names?
Well, they cut it. The fans, I'm sure I remember my brother telling me a football chant, which they used to sing about Gary, calling him the N-word, and they've cut all that footage because they didn't want to transmit, presumably.
Nothing about him taking a dump on the pitch. But he says, I wouldn't ever name any names, so I got that kind of nonsense, which was a bit weird. Whether it was part of something that made me, I don't know, but other people might not be able to handle that. So, right, okay. I don't really believe this, Gary. I just think you really wish it was true.
Also, if he genuinely believes it to be true that he is now a person of color, surely he has an N-word pass? In which case, give it a try. Take it for a spin, Gary, considering you are now a fellow black person.
I mean, he's just so obviously normal. I don't believe you, Gary.
Like, if you had to draw a European white man, I mean...
it would look fairly similar to Gary Lineker, yeah.
If you had to draw a European black man, that's not what people would do, typically.
Well, I mean, social media, as you can imagine, loved this story. It just erupted. This was just amazing. So you've got Gary Lineker when he was young, successful, and black. Again, just... you don't look black. You don't look like you've got darkish skin. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. You just look totally normal. And then perhaps it's this one, actually, in the next photo. This is when he was playing for England in the 80s.
Yeah, I could see it. I could see the maybe, yeah, this guy got racist abuse.
This is John Barnes.
Oh, wait.
He was a famous footballer back in the day. And then people pointing out, well, hang on, isn't this clown world where you've got Eddie Izzard can go to the women's toilets and Gary Lineker is black? Again, Gary, you still look like a lad with a tan, mate, because you're outside
I don't even
all
think
day.
it looks like he's got a tan in most of these photos, I'll be honest.
Well, yeah. He just carries on. Which one is Gary Lineker? Oh, no, sorry, not even... No, this is him as Ali G, because, again, that was the joke behind Ali G.
Is it because he's black?
I mean, you've got the same sort of skin tone as Sacha Baron Cohen, who isn't black, and that was why it was funny, because he was literally saying it to politicians, and they were looking at him going, what do I say? He's not black. He's just asked me if he's black. but he's putting on the sort of affectations of a black person. Am I supposed to say no? Who knows? Anyway, going to the next one. I mean, I just can't see the difference, Gary.
No. I mean, if a racist walked in the room, he'd just be confused as to which one to fight.
Thank God this person's like, just so everyone knows, Gary Lineker's the one on the left. I still wouldn't have known if you'd not told me.
Gary Lineker, left.
The next one's just brilliant. Just love this. Gary Lineker is who landed in Dover as a child refugee. And of course, you got a lot of black people on Twitter laughing at this, going, Gary, what are you talking about? Like, Gary, you sound like a prat. And
also, what the term darkish? I've never actually heard that before.
Darkish.
I've heard, you know, that people use the word dark or brown or whatever.
Yeah.
Darkish, though, is something I've not actually think I've ever heard.
But what I love about this is Gary really stretching that definition. It's like, well, when I'm tanned enough, I'm kind of darkish, which puts me in the minority category, and I was racially abused.
I mean, black people aren't actual black anyway, unless you're talking like, you know, South Sudan levels, right?
Yeah.
And then you get like brown that gets used and then black, and then it's dark.
And so Gary's just stretching out this sort of these color swatches. And it's like, no, look, I'm slightly on it.
I mean, it really is the one before white, surely.
I mean, just what are you doing, Gary? But the thing is, right, now, lots of people were laughing at Gary, and they still are laughing at Gary. And so The Guardian was like, well, hang on a second. Actually, he was right to speak out about receiving racist abuse.
I would have thought at least even they would have just thrown him under the bus and like, what the hell with this?
No, he's famous. He's got millions of followers.
Famous black man who's being abused. For...
I mean, just look at the picture they've used, right?
Get any photos? Get any images there?
How did someone mistake you for a person of colour, Gary? Again, you just got a suntan, mate.
Does he? I mean, again, I can't even see one.
I expect they've probably darkened the picture somewhat.
They've gone into Photoshop and just brushed all over him.
Yeah, okay, you're not as pale white as your shirt, admittedly, but that's not really what we mean.
He's not a white man. Come on.
But you just look like you run around in the sunshine, like all the people behind you. In fact, but anyway. So this chap Jason says most people who look at Match of the Day host Gary Lineker would have no difficulty recognizing that the man is white.
Yep.
I mean, when you say most people, the only person who appears to have a problem with that is Gary Lineker himself.
Well, and whoever wrote this article, presumably, as well, who is...
Oh, no, he recognizes he's white.
Oh.
Well, he just began that. Oh. Everyone can see Gary Lineker's white, but...
Except Gary in the mirror.
So it's a little surprise that he was mocked after revealing in a podcast interview that he suffered from racist abuse due to his darkish skin throughout childhood and at moments during his professional footballing career. So yeah, confused, poorly sighted racists who forgot their glasses. So Gary Lineker were like...
Yeah, these blind members of the clan were... I think they were shouting at just anyone who walked by, and they got lucky that it was Gary, and therefore it fit perfectly.
Gary Lineker's standing next to John Barnes, and people are yelling racist abuse. He's like, what?
John, can you believe this is happening to me?
Exactly. Well, I can't. So, Gary, it's just so obviously not true, mate. While he immediately qualified his comments with the assertion that he was, quote, as English as they come, which presumably meant white. Hey, I didn't say it. You said that. Many social media users and pundits ridiculed him for supposedly identifying as black, saying, well, yeah. But the mockery is misguided. Lineker's comments were important and insightful. Man, this is a real stretch.
What are they insightful to? To discovering what darkish is?
They give us a glimpse of how race and racism work.
What?
Blind racists mistook Gary Lineker for a black man, and that's how racism is a problem. They hold on to a view of race as static and constant throughout time and place.
Yeah.
No.
No?
No. If race is socially constructed, then actually we could expand what it is to be black to include
non-black people.
Yes, Talcum X and Gary Lineker.
Right. I would have thought that the racist position would have been that it's genetic, not that it's, just something that we've socially got.
No,
you can shift between the races. I mean, I don't think apartheid South Africa was like, well, he votes for Trump, therefore.
Postmodern, nearsighted racists are like, well, look, for the purposes of my insult, Gary Lineker is a black man, okay?
So if you're called the N-word, that makes you a black man, regardless of your skin tone.
Yes, but
you're a victim of-
that's how postmodernism works, isn't it? For a normal person, it's the person who is a woman wears a dress, and then for them, it's the person who wears the dress
N-word.
is a woman. Yeah, no, that's the way they think about it. The social construction imposes itself upon you. And so if someone insults you using the N-word, you are now black. That's what is being assumed here.
And then you have the freedom to use the N-word as you please, presumably, as well.
Well, I mean, he's a victim of it.
Yeah.
Clearly a victim of racism. And so, anyway, he says, despite the fact that we know racial categories are constantly invented and reinvented, think of, say, the codification of coloured as an identity in apartheid South Africa. Do I have to? I mean, again, the idea that before there was apartheid in South Africa, people just didn't know there were different races. It was just like, what?
How would they?
Yeah, how could they tell that there were different races of people living in South Africa before apartheid? You know, it's almost like the concept of race came before the law against certain races. I mean, it only makes sense. How could you invent a law against certain races without having a distinction regarding race?
I'm imagining that conversation between two guys. So I thought we'd make racism illegal. What?
What's racism?
So well, I don't know, but this guy mentioned that we should. This time traveler, otherwise it won't exist in 2020 for him to whine about.
And moreover, like again, if the race didn't come before the racist law, how did you even decide that there A should be a racist law, but B how it would operate?
You're asking me to find logic where there is none.
I am. He says, first, it's worth saying that if you look at photographs of Lineker as a young football player with his dark hair, olive skin, and wide nose,
you would obviously see he's a Moroccan. However,
you can see why he may have been read as something other than white.
No. Just
Again, olive skin. Yeah, okay, he's got a tan. Like the English people tan.
Like he's not even as tanned as any Spaniard.
Yeah.
In any of those photos that I've seen here. So,
but I love the assumption here, and it's just so you know the guy who wrote this has an African surname, right? So I haven't seen a picture of him, but I assume he's black. So breaking news: white people actually get darker the more time they spend in the sun, right? They tan. So white people are not just a blank sheet of paper. They actually their skin color changes as they spend time outdoors. And so like the fact that olive skin is not something that white people do never have. You know, at some points in their lives, they will have that. It's not exactly breaking news, but anyway. So he says, you know, well, you can see why, because he just so obviously looks like he might not be white, as if all white people are Scottish people who live in the Outer Hebrides or something. So he says, for whiteness to survive, its boundaries must be constantly policed. So
what does that even mean?
But imagine that, right? Because what he's saying then...
Stay in your lane, white
man?
man?
No. So there were some nearsighted Klansmen in the 80s in England, like watching Gary Lineker play football. I'm like, no, I've got to police the boundaries of whiteness here. Gary, you're a nick. You know,
you're not part of us.
Yeah, exactly. What? You know,
you spent too long out in the field.
Just of all the people to be like, yeah, I'm going to police the boundaries of whiteness with Gary Lineker. Like, no, that didn't happen. That's not what was being done.
With a bunch of neo-Nazis were like, well, if we don't get rid of him, the white race means nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Then anyone can come into the white race if Gary Lineker and be white. Like, it's such nonsense.
If we're allowed to sunbathe and still remain in the white race, something's gone wrong.
In other words, many white people will have the experience of being scrutinized for looking a bit ethnic. I love the black guy is now going to tell us what the white experience is. Have you ever been scrutinized for looking a bit ethnic? I haven't.
To define what ethnic
and
is.
I was actually thinking about this the other day, because I've noticed I tan quite easily. I've got a bit of tan just riding into work, right? And so I saw myself in the mirror holding my son, who's paler than I am because he doesn't spend as much time in the sun as I do. And I was like, oh, wow, I actually look like
You had a Gary Lineker moment.
I had a Gary Lineker moment. I was racist
maybe
to myself.
I am black.
Yeah, I was.
Your son turned and went, why is this?
Well, my son was like, oh my God, Dad. No, I'm not even going to. Thankfully, he can't speak yet. He was thinking racist thoughts.
Mum, get me away from that.
But I love the idea that this guy's coming like, yeah, so white people know what it's like to have racism. It's like, just what are you on? You know, this is just even a holiday tan can throw a white person's race into question, so fragile its borders. I love this as admitting that Gary Lineker's tanned. Like the holiday tan Gary Lineker gets from going to Qatar and playing football or something. Well, your whiteness is in question now, Gary. As if and things, this is nonsense even from the social justice perspective, right? Whiteness from the social justice perspective is not actually contingent on having white skin or the actual shade of your skin. So if like you're a neckbeard in the basement, your possession of whiteness is maximized because you've never seen sunlight. That's not what that means. This guy's an idiot. This whole thing's nonsense. It's really stupid. But anyway, he concludes, ghoulish right-wingers rushing to dismiss his words and tweet Black Lineker's matter are unremarkable and unexpected. It's like, come on, it is pretty funny. Black Lineker's, that's great. But it's worth being graceful to the more sensitive reaction from racial minorities who feel insulted or patronized by this story. And so they should, frankly, Gary. It is patronizing, say you with a suntan were being given racial abuse. Certainly the case of Rachel Dolezal appropriating black identity and claiming to be transracial, Gary, or the allegations of blackfishing against Jesse Nelson provide evidence of why many have simply had enough of what can be seen to be an epidemic of white people appropriating the racial struggle. So there we go, Gary, right? Even the guy defending you is like, well, you are appropriating the racial struggle here, aren't you, Mr. Multimillionaire, famous white man?
The racial struggle.
Yes.
Sorry, of 2022 Britain. No, the racial privilege of being an ethnic minority. That's what that is.
That's what Gary's trying to buy into, yeah.
There's no struggle he's buying into.
He's trying to get victim points and kudos and social media attention. And he did get it, but just not in the way he thought. But the point is, there's no winning here, Gary. There's no winning. A, you're not black. No one thinks you're black. No one thinks you're racially abused. And the people who are prepared to indulge in the fact that you claim to be racially abused have still cast you out as being someone who's appropriating their culture. So just knock it off, mate.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast to the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the Epoch series, this episode on the greatest knight of his age, William Marshall. And if you want to follow us and see what else we're putting out, well, you can follow us on Getter at @lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.